in reality, we need to look at net zero from a neighbourhood perspective and look at ways that we can share energy.
Welcome to the Green Urbanist, a podcast for urbanists fighting climate change. I'm Ross. Hello everyone, you're very welcome back to another episode. Today I'm chatting to Sam Luker.
So my name's Sam Luker. I'm an Associate Director in the Sustainability team at AESG.
Today we're talking about their new report titled Net Zero Neighbourhoods. And in this conversation we discuss why the neighbourhood scale is really like an optimal scale to look at decarbonisation rather than only looking at individual buildings, and why looking at the neighbourhood scale means you can find really innovative local solutions to delivering decarbonisation and wider sustainability. We look at principles and case studies for delivering net zero neighbourhoods that you can find in the report as well. This includes new builds, but actually we mostly focus on retrofitting existing neighbourhoods for decarbonising, which I think is a really interesting and essential topic. We talk about how to get communities involved and how to realise local benefits, and in some cases these case studies are totally led by local communities, in fact. And one of the biggest barriers often to delivering decarbonisation schemes or retrofit schemes is funding. Where does the money come from? So we do talk as well about the innovative funding mechanisms behind delivering net zero carbon neighbourhoods. I think for me, this was a really great conversation. Can be quite a technical subject, but I think Sam does a good job of bringing it to life with these case studies and showing that actually when you climate change, net zero carbon are these huge global issues, but once you zoom down to the local level, the neighbourhood level, you can start to find really interesting and place-specific ways of responding to those massive problems. And so for me, it's quite a hopeful conversation, and I think it will be very inspiring for you listening, particularly if you're involved with this kind of work, or whether you're just a local community member or a local resident who's interested in these things. Loads of takeaways here in this episode. If you enjoy this, you probably want to read the full report, which is a really useful sort of summary and go-to guide for these things. And so the link to that is in the episode description. Thank you so much. If you enjoy the Green Urbanist, if you're getting value from listening to this, do consider supporting the podcast financially. You can do that by giving a once-off or monthly donation. The link to that is also in the episode description. The podcast will always be free, but it's not free to create. So I have to pay for hosting and for the website, and also invest a lot of time into this, of course, as well. Now I love doing it, and hopefully we'll be able to keep doing it into the future. But financial support really helps just to keep it going and to make it possible, to help me invest back into it and to make it even better. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate your support. Just great that you're listening, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. So we wanted to chat today about your report, Net Zero Neighbourhoods. So yeah, it'd be great if you could introduce that and just tell us what it's about, why, where did it come from, etc.
Yeah, of course. So it came about, so we're working on the research piece with West London Business and the LDN Collective. It came about through conversations with West London Business and a number of issues that they've come across because of capacity issues with the electricity grid in West London. So for those, I'm sure most people probably are unaware, but some people might be aware, the capacity or the electricity grid is effectively at capacity in a number of West London boroughs because of, during the pandemic, there were a number of data centres that were developed and built, which have effectively taken up all of the excess capacity in the system, in the grid. So developers in West London are actually looking at a 10-year wait in some circumstances for their new homes to be supplied with electricity. So it's halting up a lot of development in West London, which is causing knock-on effects for businesses, and obviously with the home shortages that we have in the capital and in the country generally, it has a big knock-on impacts there. So we had a number of kind of initial discussions with West London Business and the LDN Collective to try and think about coming up with a white paper or a research piece to look at solutions to this issue. And we came across a report carried out by 3CI and Catapult, which was titled Net Zero Neighbourhoods. So that's a fantastic report. I'd really recommend anyone listening to go and look at that report. Very detailed, very technical report into net zero neighbourhoods, looking at energy and carbon, but also looking at transport and waste as well. So that in that report, it's looking at, I guess, the kind of the delivery mechanisms and the financial elements and the commercial elements for developing net zero neighbourhoods. So looking at decarbonisation on a neighbourhood scale as opposed to a kind of just an individual building level, and predominantly looking at retrofit of neighbourhoods. From that document, we effectively we were looking at that and thought perhaps it could do with a bit of a layman's conversion, perhaps, and a document that's perhaps a bit more easier to understand for the wider industry, as well as a piece that is looking more at advocacy for net zero neighbourhoods, and to kind of generate confidence for designers, planners, and also investors, to give them examples of where it's been done elsewhere, data on how it was funded, data on what were the outcomes, what were the carbon savings, and what was the cost savings, and what, looking at kind of return on investment from the investor's perspective, to advocate for more of this localized net zero neighbourhoods to go ahead, and to kind of give confidence to planners and designers as well that this can be done, and to unlock funding for this as well.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, I'm really excited to get into some of the details on this. I think, the first thing I think is amazing is this thing of the data centers gobbling up so much energy capacity. I think it's something that is so often hidden, and, so much of our lives are online now. We forget that there is real infrastructure that's very energy intensive that allows all of this to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite interesting. I actually hadn't heard that at all, that we had sort of gotten to capacity in a couple of West London boroughs. So that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think it's one of the main cables that connects to data to the internet comes from America, or comes from the Atlantic. So comes into London from the west, so comes through the West London boroughs, and a number of the data centers are located strategically close to that cable so that they can optimize their internet speeds. So it was just kind of happened because of the location of the cable and such. Yeah.
That's interesting. And the other thing is this is obviously looking at a neighborhood scale, which is quite refreshing, because I think a lot of the focus on sustainability in the industry has been very much about architecture and individual buildings and individual developments.
Yeah.
Why is it important to look at it at a neighborhood scale instead of a building scale?
I think it's important because of the connectivity between the spaces in terms of how they're used, optimizing how and where we're generating electricity, when it's used in terms of the demand, the looking at kind of potential storage options at a neighborhood level, and obviously how kind of the neighborhoods interact and how they're operated in reality. There's never a building that's operated on its own, unless it has an enormous amount of PV and a large battery storage, it's unlikely to ever to kind of perform on its own. So in reality, we need to look at net zero from a neighbourhood perspective and look at ways that we can share energy, both thermal energy and electrical energy. If we're looking at heat networks, which we do in a number of our case studies, and then on the electrical side, if we've got different kind of use classes, if we have industrial and office and retail, combining that with residential, you obviously have different periods of the day in which energy is consumed in those different spaces, and you might have excess renewables that you're able to use at the weekends, for example, in residential spaces that's not being used in kind of retail and in industrial. So yeah, it's super important if we're looking at trying to reduce our energy consumption and use more renewables at a local level, to kind of look at it from a neighbourhood's perspective.
Okay, yeah, I mean that makes sense, and I think just from the couple of sort of larger master plan developments that are maybe looking to achieve net zero carbon or a very low operational carbon, they do take that sort of network approach to their energy system, where they have a sort of energy hub and they can centralize some storage and have the PVs and that kind of thing, so everything is shared across a wider area. So
absolutely.
Is it the same principle if you were retrofitting an existing neighborhood?
Effectively, it's similar. You obviously have different. You're not able to optimize the energy efficiency and from kind of fabric improvements and orientation in that sense. So you're already looking at a baseline that's higher than you would have if you were looking at a new development. But effectively, a number of case studies that we're looking at, whether it's connecting, kind of electrically connecting the neighborhood or retrofitting a heat network into the neighborhood, how you would kind of power that, it shouldn't differ too much between a new development and a retrofit. It's just, for a retrofit, it's very tricky with existing infrastructure, existing roads and stuff. But if that wasn't an issue, then you would do it in a similar way. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And this, your report, Net Zero Neighbourhoods, is it geared towards new master plans or retrofitting existing places?
We tried to do a bit of both. Yeah. So we've got a number
of
case studies looking at probably about half and half. So we've got 10 case studies in total, about 5 of new build and 5 retrofit. We wanted to cover both bases because it's important. I mean, most of the work that needs to be done in the space is retrofit, so we wanted to include as much as that as we could. But at the same time, for new builds, it's making sure that we're optimizing all the opportunities that we can whilst they're being built, because we know it's more costly and more carbon intensive to then retrofit further down the line, as well as causing more higher bills for the occupants.
Okay, great. Can you take us through some of the case studies that are in the report on, real life net zero neighborhoods?
So we have 10 case studies. Most of them are in the UK. We do have so 8 of them, I believe, are in the UK, and one of them is in Germany, Vauban, which is Freiburg, which is a solar city, and then one of them is in Vancouver, actually, looking at waste heat from sewage, providing hot water and heating to 34 buildings, I think. So a fairly large scheme utilising waste industrial heat. So I will probably first focus on Energise Barnsley, which is a scheme, a programme set up in Barnsley in Yorkshire. So it's a program set up and run by the local community, utilizing kind of a combination in terms of funding through retail bonds and then loans from ethical lenders. So I think 60% of the ownership in the community bond is from the local community. So it's great that, first of all, it's fantastic that the local community are invested and able to profit and benefit from this scheme. So effectively how the program works is they raised all this money, as I mentioned, through bonds and ethical funding. They paid for a combination. It's mostly, or it's a combination of insulation, renewables through rooftop solar, and then energy storage. And then they've set up a delivery vehicle for delivering and kind of implementing the PV and insulation. And then they have also set up a mechanism for recuperating the costs. So those that invested through the bond have a guaranteed interest rate that they're paid per annum, and the lender as well also receives a guaranteed local return. So effectively, the tenants of the buildings that receive the PV panels and the insulation and the batteries will be paying into a not into a kind of a typical energy tariff, but will be paying for their electricity to this separate entity, local DNO, that's been set up. So at slightly reduced rates compared to what they would be paying a local energy provider. And in that sense, they're able to recuperate costs and then reinvest that money as well into the further rollout of more PV and batteries, storage and insulation and such. So it's an excellent example of funded by the local community, delivered by the local community, and then they're also benefiting in terms of the return on investment and further rollout of more decarbonisation measures.
That's really fascinating. Was that did that begin as a sort of community initiative? Like, how did that get off the ground originally?
Yeah, I believe so. So it was set up by the group called the Community or Barnsley Community Energy Coalition. So with the aim of generating and saving energy together for the benefit of everyone. So they kind of kick-started the project, and then were able to get the ethical lender on board, and then were able to look at retail bonds and kind of generating more funding in that sense. So it's very much from the idea and initiative from the local community.
That's so interesting. I mean, I'm always in awe of excuse me. I'm always in awe of the sort of communities that just, self-start and get these things to happen. And, I think it would be great if there was more mechanisms and more guidance, I suppose, for other communities to sort of learn from that and then get the ball rolling, quicker, maybe replicate the same model. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's probably our primary aim, is for someone or people to look at the document that we've developed. We've got all the kind of the key statistics, all the key data in there, and to take it away and say, why can't I do that in my local community for this one? And a designer that's looking at another case study, why can't I do that on the project that I'm working on? Investors that are looking at it to look at it and say, hey, there's a really good opportunity to unlock private capital and private money in projects like this, get decent return on investment, and it's ticks all the boxes in terms of their green investments that they need to hit these days. So yeah, it's that's exactly what we want to achieve.
Yeah, and the innovation is in the finance model rather than any sort of technical model, because we're using technology that exists, already. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, because a lot of the time people will think innovation and will immediately jump to technology, to some kind of silver bullet in terms of fusion or some other unlimited energy source that's going to save us from the climate change. But sometimes it's kind of simple collaboration or simple financial mechanisms that are set up that just get everything going, get everything off the ground. But in a sense, they're innovative, but at the same time, pretty simple.
So I don't know much about Barnsley. Can you just paint a picture of what kind of a place is it? Is it like a town in the Yorkshire Dales, quite low density, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a average sized town in Yorkshire. There's nothing. I don't want to be too offensive, but it's a standard town in a UK county. Really, there's nothing overly special about or unique about its building stock or the electricity grid or anything like that. There, it's there's nothing to suggest that it's not replicable effectively in any other town. So. Yeah, and to be honest, if anything, it's fairly far north in the UK, and more southern counties are likely to get a higher generation from PV and more sunny days. So, if anything, it's more doable in Sussex and Kent and Hampshire and other kind of counties that are further south.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I suppose what I'm thinking as well is that, and maybe you'll get onto this with another case study, but there's this trade-off between maybe a low-rise, lower density place, which has a lot of roof space for PVs and maybe more sort of free space for battery storage and that kind of thing, against a more high-density neighborhood where then it's really limited and you're maybe having some competition for like green roofs and things like that as well. I imagine that changes things quite a bit.
It does, absolutely, yeah. I think I saw a recent article on the optimized building height for sustainability, and I think it was around 5 or 6 stories was the optimum, because then you can still have a green roof, generate a decent amount of renewable energy on your roof, but then you have the sufficient density to enable sustainable transport and such as well. So yeah, it's difficult, and there's trade-offs in both. For a kind of a single house, if you've got a south-facing roof, there's no reason why you can't be bill-free, really. Wow. If you can put in a sufficient solar, and that's a bit of a segue, but Octopus and another developer, apologies, I can't remember their name, Hill Homes perhaps, are looking at developing the first zero bill development I think it's in South Wales. Sorry, I should know this. But with sufficient planning, sufficient orientation, thought given to orientation and building fabric, a good PV array on your roof, and then battery storage, Octopus have guaranteed that the development is going to be bill free for at least 10 years. So it's completely doable at that scale. If you're looking at it from a broader holistic perspective, then you're more likely to be somewhere further out of town. You're likely to be more dependent on the car. So you do need to factor that in. But if you're looking at just the built environment, then it can be effectively net zero. So I think broadly, to kind of circle back and answer your question, there's things that we can be doing. There's different approaches, whether you're looking at low rise or looking at high rise. And I think it's just the case of doing the best that we can in those different locations.
Yeah. Great. Should we have another case study?
Yeah, sure. The next one I wanted, kind of a similar theme, but slightly different in terms of how they've gone about it, is it's a initiative developed by Kenza, who are a heat pump manufacturer effectively and contractor, and it's called Heat the Streets, their program. So it's based in Cornwall. So it's a number of different sites in Cornwall, a number of different towns. Similarly, relatively kind of suburban housing, low rise. What they are doing there is it's predominantly focused on council housing, and social housing. So what they were looking at there was a number of their, what kind of catalysed the approach there. A number of their occupants had very high energy bills and were struggling to heat their homes in a number of cases. So what Kenza have gone in and done is installed a heat network, a ground source heat network, which effectively is a number of boreholes underneath the roads in the street, with horizontal pipeworks connecting into the homes as well. So the majority of the infrastructure is subsurface, it's in the ground. And then you have a small unit that's been retrofitted into a number of homes. And Kenza effectively have paid for that system to be installed with local authority backing, but I think the vast majority of the costs were provided by Kenza, and then they effectively become the D&O for that area, in the sense that the occupants no longer pay gas standing charges and gas bills and electricity standing charges and bills. They still pay electricity for their unregulated usage from computers and other bits, but just talking about heating and hot water, they would no longer pay gas standing charges and gas tariffs, but they would pay Kenza a standing charge and then a fixed amount per kilowatt hour for their heat provision. Sorry, it's a bit technical.
No, it's interesting to know.
And able to provide it at lower costs, much lower cost than what they were paying for their gas. It's a really efficient system that they've designed. So it's up to 500% efficiency they get from their system, because these boreholes are located underneath hard asphalt and hard infrastructure. You effectively get kind of passive heating of those hard surfaces, which then heats up the boreholes and heats up the horizontal pipework, which distributes into the homes. So the heat pump system is just extracting the heat from those from that kind of distribution network, and it has enabled the homes to be provided with low cost heat, which has enabled them to be able to heat their homes to higher, more comfortable temperatures than what they were previously. So we thought that was a really good example of a mechanism that unlocks private funding for the kind of benefit from a carbon perspective, benefit from an energy perspective, but also kind of the socio-economic benefits in terms of reduction in bills and a more comfortable environment for those occupants of the social housing. And it's clearly beneficial for Kenza to do so, and they're looking at further sites to kind of roll this out. And it's just a fantastic way of, I guess it's shifting the money from them paying to utility companies to paying Kenza, but doing so in a low carbon manner. So it's good in that sense.
I mean, the socioeconomic benefits and the fuel poverty benefits and that kind of thing, it sort of has to be part of the argument for doing these things, doesn't it? Because it's, I mean, I think if you add up the cost of investing in heat pumps and that kind of thing versus, the cost of doing nothing, obviously it is a big investment up front, but when you do the accounting that is more multifaceted to include obviously, reductions of carbon emissions, but also, that aspect for people who are struggling to heat their homes. I mean, it's just such a powerful message, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where we need collaboration between public bodies and private bodies to kind of identify these opportunities and identify where there are kind of more risks from a socio-economic perspective and try and leverage private funding to unlock it in as many cases as we can.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're benefiting from a sort of urban heat island effect. Is that what you were saying with it being under hard surfaces?
In a sense, yeah. So because it's extracted. The ground is a more stable temperature typically than air. So a ground source heat pump, you get a higher efficiency than you would do from an air source heat pump. Okay. But yeah, because of the locating the boreholes in the pipework within the roads, effectively, or underneath the roads, they're able to benefit from the kind of the passive heat from the sun as well as I don't know if it goes as far as being interseasonal in terms of its heat storage, but obviously in the summer you can get some of those surfaces can get pretty hot. So the efficiency to provide hot water during the summer months is likely to be very, very efficient because of that.
Yeah, I can imagine, for sure. I mean, I talk a lot on the podcast about the urban heat island effect and needing to cool cities and that kind of thing, but it's quite interesting to hear that there are some benefits as well.
Yeah, and this is obviously on a fairly low rise suburban scale, but if you're looking at it in the city, there's a huge amount of urban heat island effect that is a big issue in terms of health and placing additional capacity on cooling systems. But yeah, potentially there's opportunity for that heat to be at least funneled into hot water in the summer months, because everyone's obviously still taking showers and using hot water for cleaning and such. So I'm surprised that hasn't kind of been looked at in further detail, because then effectively you're cooling the spaces as well. If you're extracting that heat, it's providing a dual benefit.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And I was on that topic, what about getting waste heat from other sources? You know, what about like these data centers in West London are probably kicking out loads of heat? Yeah,
that's exactly our thinking. We were looking for a good case study to look at waste heat from a data center. The best one we found was in Ireland, actually, was in Tallaght. Right. Tallaght, I don't know if you...
Tallaght.
Got the right person to ask.
Yeah. A lot of silent letters in Irish, unfortunately.
Is there? Yes, we're kind of desperately trying to find a good example of retrofit of a data center to provide heat and hot water. We couldn't find a good enough example, but the example we did find is for a new build, which is utilizing waste heat from an Amazon. Yes, it is Amazon. Sorry, got confused with Amazon and Google. An Amazon data center to provide heat to a number of public buildings, as well as over 100 affordable apartments. So effectively exactly as the same as what we were just talking about. Instead of cooling that data center, you're extracting that heat and utilizing it for hot water in public buildings and affordable apartments. So you're turning a negative into positive, and then also solving that initial issue. So I think this is a huge potential in West London for this to be looked at from a retrofit perspective. And I think that's perhaps some innovation in that space that needs to occur before we can kind of unlock that. But this case study, it showed that the technology's there. I think it's probably more infrastructural issues that you would kind of stop it from taking off from a retrofit perspective. But that there's certainly plenty of energy available from data centers, because they're obviously using a lot of electricity, and we want to be, instead of then doubling up and cooling those spaces, you're using electricity twice. You want to be utilizing that waste heat, so you're only using it once, and reducing electricity consumption in both ways.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned earlier about a case study where they're using, is it from a waste treatment plant or something?
Yeah, so we have two case studies which we found utilizing from a waste sewage treatment plant. One in Scotland, which is Borders College. So that's a really good example, because it's a retrofit example, whereby the college, the university, has connected this specific system, designed a specific system to extract the heat from the sewage system and provide it to both their kind of modern buildings, as well as, interestingly enough, some of their historic listed buildings as well. So it's a really good example of it kind of showcasing that you can connect this kind of innovative new technology to old listed buildings, and it's still kind of providing sufficient heat and hot water. And then the other example that we have is from Canada. This was on the news about a month ago, perhaps a bit longer than that ago actually, which some people might have seen, which is on a far bigger scale. So it's connecting to the city of Vancouver's sewage system and extracting heat from that, providing it to over 6 million square feet of a combination of residential, commercial, and institutional space. Over 34 buildings, I believe. So a huge amount of space that's heat and hot water is provided just from a renewable source, effectively. And the heat trapped in sewage, you're able to gain very good efficiencies, kind of similar and higher in some cases than a ground source heat pump. So there's a number of examples that are kind of utilizing that technology. So it's certainly feasible. And with the kind of the two different scales that we provided in our case study show that it's feasible from a relatively small scale to a enormous scale, frankly, in Vancouver. Yeah.
Gosh, that's fascinating. Okay, I'll definitely look into that and maybe try and get someone from Vancouver on to talk about that, because it's very exciting when you see these things scaled up, to such a large scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly enough, on Vancouver, they went through significant public engagement to decide on the energy system that was going to go in. Initially, it was going to be a biomass boiler, which has its arguable green credentials. Yeah, fairly controversial. I'd argue it's probably not very renewable.
Yeah,
or not
burning wood chips, essentially. Is that it?
Yeah, exactly. Similar to kind of Drax. But because of concerns around local air quality, as well as the sustainability of the development, they got a lot of negative feedback from that consultation process and went down a different route. So the system in Canada is actually was developed and run by Vancouver City Council as well, interestingly. So they obviously had to pay for the initial capital costs. They're able to recuperate the benefits from the system in terms of the bills that the tenants are paying to them, as well as the kind of the local socio-economic benefits that they gain from having cleaner air and having a general, nicer system that's cheaper and better, effectively.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of an example, I think in Paris, and there might be other cities that are doing it as well, on the opposite side. Rather than capturing waste heat, they've developed a system where they can move cold river water as a cooling system, through streets and buildings, which again is really fascinating, because it's the water will be flowing through anyway. So why not just divert it to pull some heat out of the city? It's really interesting.
Yes, that sounds very interesting. Yeah, I guess a lot of the water from Paris and in France flows down from the Alps, doesn't it? So it's probably quite nice and cool. So yeah. So that's great. Yeah, I'll look into that.
We've got sort of, less than 15 minutes left. Can't believe how quickly that has gone. Was there any other sort of case studies or any other points you wanted to raise while we have time?
Perhaps I'll go through another case study quickly. Actually, perhaps I'll just chat about the kind of another section that we got in the report, actually, is future gazing. So learning from the past and looking into the future. So this is section for developments that perhaps are still in the design phase, as well as kind of more innovative concepts that are being developed. So we've got a number of different examples, one of which is the Zero Bills Home, which I mentioned, the Octopus scheme, which the first kind of pilot is in South Wales, but I think they're looking to partner up and have joint ventures and develop that in further locations. Other systems as well. There's we were chatting with a very interesting and innovative company called SNRG, who are looking at, they kind of, in a similar sense to the case studies that I went through, that are providing the Kenza one, which is providing the ground source heat pump and recharging the tenants in that sense. SNRG do a very similar thing, but from the electrical side. So they will pay for the kind of the upfront capital cost of a solar system with batteries, predominantly in industrial areas. There are huge numbers of industrial roofs that are underutilized in terms of their capability to generate electricity from PV. So what in a number of situations, and we spoke to a few investors and kind of developers in the industrial space, and a big issue that they have is that they either can't fund it or they generate, there's no benefit from them generating or maximizing the PV on their roof in terms of feed-in tariffs or export tariffs. Feed-in tariffs were obviously scrapped a few years ago, and then export tariffs, the rate is typically so low that it doesn't make financial sense for them to do so. So what SNRG, a few aspects here. So what SNRG do is they pay for the upfront capital cost and then will effectively sell the electricity back to the company that are in occupying the industrial space at a reduced rate. So sort of 25% or so less than what they would be paying anyway. So it's a win-win for all parties. SNRG retain kind of control and the management of the PV and the batteries, but then sell it back to the occupant. Sorry, I said that. So there's both kind of the decarbonisation element that the company is able to talk about and kind of report, as well as reducing costs. So it's win-win for them, and SNRG have made it work in terms of their financial model, that the kind of return on investment for them makes sense. Another kind of innovative area that has been kind of looked at in terms of utilizing commercial space and the optimization and the optimization of roof space in particular is looking at specific tariffs. So discussions with developers and investors in the industrial space, they, as I mentioned, they typically unable or they're unwilling to want to kind of deck out all of their roof space in PV, because what the benefit is for them in terms of the export tariffs. But what they can do, if they're kind of if they're a developer or a portfolio manager that has a number of different buildings, typically if you generated your PV electricity from PV on one building, you wouldn't be able to utilize that PV in other buildings. But there's now tariffs that are being set up by a number of companies at Octopus, talking about them a lot, doing some really good work. But they've set up a tariff now whereby you can say if you have a number of industrial buildings, you have full PV on all the roofs, and then you have a number of office buildings in the city, for example, you're able to utilize the PV that's generated there within your office buildings, so you can save on costs and you can save on carbon, and that also kind of relates to the reporting that you do as well, and you're able to kind of outline that your net zero carbon obviously as a kind of a portfolio instead of individual buildings. Bit of verbal diarrhea. So yeah, lots of kind of different kind of mechanisms that are being set up. Kind of the tariff one is so simple, but just something that simple is just unlikely to unlock. It just makes financial sense for the businesses now to do that. And if they don't want to go down that model, they don't want to pay for upfront, then you have a business like SNRG that are happy to come in and kind of operate the system and then sell the electricity back to you. So it's kind of having simple mechanisms like that unlock funding are a number of the areas that we're looking into in terms of future gazing. The majority of the technical innovations of kind of, there's no silver bullet coming. Most of them are kind of well known. I think it's the areas of utilizing waste heat, which are probably the areas for most innovation. So we're also looking at, there's a development in Islington, which is a pilot scheme, which is looking at extracting waste heat from the underground, which has been talked about for a number of years now.
Fantastic.
But that's, I think it's going through planning, or it's been granted planning. It's going through design at the moment. So that's amazing. That will be really innovative. And if they can get some good data from that and showcase that it's efficient and cost effective, then hopefully that will be rolled out across London. So yeah, kind of trying to look at a combination of technological as well as kind of financial mechanism type innovations that will likely be how we can kind of push forward more decarbonisation on a neighbourhood scale in the future.
Fantastic. Yeah. Someone please pull the heat out of the central line. It's way too way too hot in the summer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely the worst line, isn't it? It's the hottest line. Even in winter, it feels really hot, that line, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's a resource waiting to be tapped.
Yeah. Well, I imagine all of the lines that feel comfortable and throughout the year are cooled. So
yeah,
like what we were talking about earlier, if you can extract that heat, instead of cooling it, it's a win-win, because then you can utilize that heat elsewhere and you don't need to provide cooling. So great.
I think for me, what this conversation has highlighted is that it depends on the scale you look at, what solutions you can come up with. Because I think when you look at the scale of a country, or like if we look at the UK and we think, how do we transition to net zero? Then you're talking about huge wind farms in Scotland, mass retrofits, who's going to pay for that? All these sort of very tricky things. Once you zoom down to the neighborhood level, you can start being really innovative and using, the local things that are around and coming up with like locally based solutions. And it almost, even though it's still a massive issue, it sort of feels like you can start solving local, the local challenges here and there. And you can sort of, if we can get lots of community groups, lots of energy providers sort of doing this in various places, it feels like real progress could be made. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. I think we need a combination of that kind of top down generation, big wind farms, as well as local initiatives, if we're going to get close to sort of our net zero targets. It needs to come from both. And I think doing this research has definitely made me more optimistic in terms of the work that's been done and the possibility for unlocking funding and development in the space.
Thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
No worries. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, really good to chat.